Welcome to Small Arms Solutions. Today we're having an opportunity to look at something very, very rare. In fact, I want to thank one of our viewers for sending this to us to have the opportunity to do a review on it. This rifle is very, very rare. There was very few of them produced and even fewer imported in the United States. But we're going to jump right into it. But any of you viewers who want anything reviewed, please feel free to get a hold of Heather at smallarmsolutions.com. Let me know what you got, because you guys interacting with me and me being able to review stuff that you want that I may not necessarily be able to get my hands on, we both win. So I'm always looking to review a lot of different rifles. Now, normally I only show you things that you can purchase. I try to keep away from the guns that are just great for you to see, but I can't do anything. Now this you can purchase, but your ability to find them is going to be pretty rare. What we have here is the Leader Dynamics T2 Mark V. Now this is one of the first and only rifles that I'm aware of that was designed and manufactured in Australia. This was designed by a gentleman named Charles St. George. What his mandate was, the Australian Army was carrying the FNFAL for quite some time, and they wanted to go to a modernized assault rifle, a lightweight, intermediate caliber. Now, at the time this was going on, we were still using the M193 ammunition. It was prior to the NATO standardization of the SS-109 or M855 ball. So what Mr. St. George wanted to do was he wanted to design a rifle which would compete against the M16A1 and the Steyr AUG as a homegrown weapon that could be manufactured simply, easily, and cost-effective for the Australian Army. Now, a lot of countries are, especially non-industrialized countries, are very much dependent on foreign manufacturers to provide them with equipment for their military. For instance, the Middle East, with the exception of Caracal and IWI, you don't have any weapons manufacturers in that region of the world, so it's all dependent on foreign countries. Now, as a country, that's a problem, because say you are buying guns from the United States and all of a sudden you now have issues with the United States. The State Department's not happy with something that you've done, and they pull your licenses, which means now you can no longer get spare parts, you can no longer get more guns. Well, with the United States, it's a pure nightmare anyways, because you're always at the whim of the State Department, where other countries are not nearly as strict. But still, when you farm that out, you always hold that risk of something happening with politics between the two countries and you not being able to get your equipment. So my theory, it was really, really good. Mr. St. George went to design this. He went with DuPont to get information and assistance to manufacture the handguards, the pistol grip, and the stock. He did not have a lot of the polymer experience that was necessary for use with this lightweight rifle. Now, what happened was the barrel blanks were brought in from the UK. That was from Parker Yale in the UK, and they were shipped into Australia. Now, the magazines, the 20-round magazines, came in from Charter Arms of Singapore. Now, when the barrel blanks came in, Mr. St. George needed a way to manufacture them, so he developed his own and manufactured his own button-cut rifling machine, which enabled him to do that in-house as well. So, when we take a look at what this thing is, we do have a long stroke type weapon. It's actually a long stroke type, and you actually have a movable piston that's in the inside. The upper receiver is manufactured from 16-gauge steel. The lower receiver is also stamped metal. Again, this was designed to be easy to manufacture, did not require a lot of high-tech machining, unlike the M16. You were using modern CNC machines to have a precision rifle. This was not designed to be as much. Now, the manufacturing facility was in Smithfield, Australia for this, and a lot of work did go into it. Unfortunately, in the end, it did not win. It was beat out by the AUG, and the Australian Army would go on to use the AUG well into the time period right now. The gun has served them long and true. I'm sort of surprised, because the New Zealand Army has been using the Steyr AUG as well. They just switched over to the LMT, wanting something more updated, but I guess that's a different story. What we're going to do is we're going to go over this. Now, what you see here, believe it or not, it has some remnants of an M16, but there's absolutely nothing M16 about this short of the magazine. There are no compatibility issues with any components on them whatsoever. So we're going to go back to front. We're going to take a look at what we got here. Looking at the back here, we have a polymer stock again. It was this Mr. St. George worked with DuPont on these different types of polymers. This is a very, very durable type polymer, especially for its day, as well as the pistol grip that you see right here. When you look at the rear sight, you have a rotating dial here with different apertures on it. Now, in order to move it, you have to push the spring-loaded plunger inward, and now that will allow you to make your adjustments. This also has a rear sight windage knob as well. You do see a rudimentary carrying handle, but you can also see you have the witness hole, so when you look through the sight, you can see through the carrying handle into the front sight. Very rudimentary, very M16-ish. You do have two holes in here which will accept a scope mount. I don't think much work was done with a scope mount for as far as this is concerned. I have to say this is rather flimsy here, very easily bent. So for as far as putting a scope mount on it, I will be very concerned about zeroing issues, because this one here looks like it might be a little bit beveled in as well. It doesn't look like it's straight, but that's what the carry handle was. Now, we're going to take a look closer at the lower receiver when we take it apart, but you're going to see that instead of using standard roll pins, we use E-clips. As you can see, we use E-clips to hold in the front pivot pin, and the hammer and trigger pins, you'll see there's E-clips that are used. Now, this is certainly an inexpensive way to do it. For as far as a good way to do it, I'm not going to say it's a very good way to do it, because you have to use a screw to remove the E-clip, and the chances of losing an E-clip is very, very good. In fact, when I got this, it was missing an E-clip on the hammer pin, which, you know, this rifle still functioned properly, but it needs to have those E-clips on there. So one way I was able to thank the gentleman who provided me this, I went and I got him some E-clips, so everything is clipped on as properly as it's supposed to be. But that was one issue I felt there's a problem with. And another major issue was the magazine well. Now, the magazine well, I only fired like 3 or 4 magazines out of this, because this is a very rare rifle. I was very happy to have the opportunity to fire it, and I did not want to shoot it, you know, too much. But I noticed the problem, and it was a very well documented problem, was the magazine well was undersized. Many magazines that I had, and these were all aluminum, by the way. I didn't use anything other than the aluminum GI type magazines in here, 20s and 30s. Many of them had very great difficulty inserting and pulling out. It was not a oversized magazine well by no means, but it did, and I can't imagine using a polymer magazine that swells. You probably would never get it in. But the magazine well was definitely super tight. As you can see, we have a trigger guard. Now, the trigger, when we look inside, it looks M16-ish. But it's not. It's not compatible. It just has some similarities to it. Now, we have a non-reciprocating charging handle at the top here, which is part of the handguard, which we will see when we take apart how this all goes together. We have a 2-piece handguard. Now, when you look at some of the design features on here, you have this very similar to that of the FAL or the FNC, for as far as the way the cocking handle is on the FAL versus the type of handguard that you have on here, very similar to the FAL as well. The barrel, you know, this is a standard chrome moly vanadium barrel. You're going to have chrome plating on there as well. Now, the muzzle device we have on here was also an issue this rifle always had. This basically is a no-flute muzzle brake for the most part. It doesn't really serve much of a purpose at all. Many people who bought these would go ahead and swap them out to M16A1 type birdcage and 3-prong suppressors, because it was far more reliable and far more useful. I do have an M10 bayonet on here, so as you can see, this is basically a mid-length gas system, and you have a bayonet lug. You'll take a standard M16 type bayonet, and looking back here, you'll see your gas block here, which is pinned into place. You have a front sight blade as opposed to a post, and this is not movable, so this stays right where it is. You do have some vent holes. I will say this thing did heat up relatively quickly. As I view this rifle, this was a prototype. This thing never got and never went through a development process where it was seriously ready to go into military service. But going without saying, it was very well thought out in its design. And what we're going to do now is we'll take this thing apart, and we're going to see what makes it tick inside. As we see here, we have the magazine release. And you can see that magazine's a little on the stiff side. We're going to flip this over, and you'll see your safe fire. Again, these were safe semi-auto. And when you look closely here, you can see the use of the E-clips. Now, the only E-clip we're going to be concerned with removing is going to be this front one, because this front one here, if you want to separate the upper and lower receiver, you have to. So we're going to be doing that. But first, we're going to show you how to break it open. As with any firearm, we're going to make sure that it's empty. The bolt does not lock open on this rifle at all. We're going to push inward on the latch, and now it's going to break open like an AR-15 or M16. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to rotate this over. We remove the E-clip. It's magnetized. Push inward. Outside. We are going to remove the front pivot pin. Now we can separate the upper and lower receivers. Now, as you can see, we basically have weld marks in here from where this is all welded together. Bolted sheet metal. You can see your supports, as you see right here. Now, looking at the trigger mechanism, you see a rather large hammer. Again, it's M16-ish. It's very, very different. A little bit heavier. Look in the inside, you can see some of the the injection molding, and just the disconnector was not very well made. You can see from this here, it looks like it's 2 pieces together. Your hammer trigger springs are similar to that of the M16 disconnector, but again, these are not compatible. But you can see very, very crude, very simple, but it works. Now we're going to take a look at the bolt mechanism. Pull that straight out. Now, first off, what we're going to look at is this is very similar to that of the AR-18, if you can see the way the cam pin works and such. But here's where we get really different. Take a look at the shape of this bolt. This bolt is triangular shaped, as opposed to a standard M16 where you would have your 7 rotating lugs. Now, why would somebody do this instead of this? Well, we have a couple of reasons. First, this is far more expensive to manufacture than this. When you have to make all the different radials for the quality control, it's a much more complex system. Here, you're only going to be locking at 3 points versus 7 on your extension. So this is a much cheaper way to go about doing it. Whether it's superior or not, the only time this has been seen since is Ronnie Barrett did the same thing on his semi-automatic 50 caliber. He went with a rotating triangular shaped bolt head as well. It was never really carried over to any other firearms that I'm aware of. You know, I don't know everything, but I'll be the first one to say that. But I'm aware of no other military rifles where this actually happens, where you would go with the triangular one. But this was done for simplicity of manufacture, for durability. Simplicity of manufacture is really, really a big deal for this. So again, we see very similar to the AR-18 dual recoil springs. As you see here, though, this is not a standard pin. This was not designed to be disassembled at the user's level. This was designed to be disassembled at the armorer's level. And most militaries like to do that because they don't want you to lose parts, which in this rifle's case, it's a really good idea because, especially these E-clips, it can be very easy to lose parts. But as we see, AR-18 lineage. Now as we look into the receiver, again we see welds. We see this square sheet metal. We can see the welds. Again, very, very simple, very, very inexpensive to manufacture, but holds up rather well. Now in order to take a look at the gas system, we have to remove the handguards. We have 2 screws. I'll be very careful not to lose any components here. As you can see, as we push back on the cocking lever, this pushes rearward and it will push on the carrier itself to knock it backwards. So we're just going to pull this right forward and pull that right out. And now what we're doing is we're exposing the gas system. So we're going to disassemble, pull back. And there we have our gas system. Very simple, very clean. First we have the spigot, then we have the piston. Now you can see here the vent holes for when the piston pushes back. As you can see, it pushes back maybe like half an inch or so. Releases the gas up front towards the sides. Your intermediate rod, as well as your operating rod recoil spring. For reassembly, insert the end with the spring in first. Now we're going to take our piston. It's going to go on first. And now we're going to have our intermediate rod. And there we go. Now for reassembly, you can see the spring is clipped onto the handguard here. And as you can see, the operating rod goes right into that hole as you see right there. Switch over the handguards. So for reassembly, we do have our hex nuts that go into place. They're held in place by a molding of these, the way these nuts sit in here. We need to be sure we put on our lock washer. And we will do the same in the back. You do not want to over tighten this because you don't want to damage the handguards, because you will not get replacement ones. Last I knew, there was no spare parts around for this one at all. So that's why we're being really, really careful with everything. Okay, now for the upper and lower receiver, we're going to join the two. Drop the front pivot pin. Now we have to install the E-clip. Reassembly. Take the bolt, insert it in the rear, push inward on the locking plate, drop down. And that's all we have to it. As previously stated, this rifle did have its issues. Again, we had an issue with the flash hider. We had an issue with chambers. Part of his manufacturing process with his barrels, he did not have a very good method for as far as being sure there was no tool marks or any kind of a rough chamber, which would cause a lot of failures to extract. And there were some tolerancing issues as well. Again, this is not as precision of a process as you would have with a modern, AR-15 or modern military rifle. But, overall, I think it's a pretty interesting weapon. You're looking at about 7.5 pounds, which was, it was comparable to that of the M16A1. You got 38 inches in length. You had a cyclic rate of about 700 rounds a minute, so your rate of fire was a little bit slower than that of the M16, because, M16s are around 700, 950, but realistically, you're probably up in the mid-8s, mid to high 8s. Again, gas-operated, short-stroke tappet. You have iron sights, optics capable. However, the reality of using a mount on this, I'm very, very skeptical, because this is very flimsy. Racking that on something that's hard, like a tank or like any kind of metal, you can certainly bend this. This one looks like it does have some kind of a bend to it already. So for as far as that scope being true, once you have it mounted on there, I don't really have a lot of faith that would work very well. There are fewer than 2,000 of these imported into the United States, which is what makes this thing very, very valuable. Looking at it, it is a less expensive rifle, but when you have very few of things entering into the country, that makes the demand for them even higher. You can still see these occasionally on Gunbroker. What we're going to do is we're going to take this thing out to the range and we're going to see how it shoots. Now, we're only going to be firing a few magazines because, again, this is an old girl and I didn't want to use it too much. Well, I put about 60 or 80 rounds or so through this thing, and I had not one malfunction. It worked 100%. As I said, there's no bolt lock open in the last shot. I'm very, very grateful for this gentleman to allow us to take a look at this. It's a neat piece of history. Anytime a country decides to step out of their comfort zone to design a firearm for their military and submit it, unfortunately, when you're a new startup company, you're going to have a hard time competing against the big guys, the ones who've been around a long time, ones that are tried and true. But this did show some very interesting Australian ingenuity. So if you enjoyed this video, please click like, please subscribe, even better, share. Please consider making a donation via our Patreon page. We'd really use some assistance for you guys who are enjoying our work.